Number 9. H.L. Hunley. The H.L. Hunley, also known as the CSS Hunley, was the first combat submarine to sink a warship, but its success in doing so came at a major cost. It carried Confederate soldiers into Charleston Harbor for the first time in 1863 as part of a mission to destroy a Union blockade of the city. But something caused it to sink, killing 5 of the men aboard. The sub underwent repairs and was launched again a few months later, but some knucklehead forgot to close a valve and the Hunley sank. The entire 8-man crew died. Once again, the Confederate Navy recovered the vessel and put it back into service. It was launched for a third and final time in early 1864, but vanished along with its crew after sinking the U.S. Navy ship USS Housatonic with a torpedo. The submarine was rediscovered in 1995 by a team of shipwreck hunters. It had come to rest on the seafloor in Charleston Harbor right next to Housatonic. The wreck was raised 5 years later. No one knows what caused the Hunley to sink. The crew may have run out of oxygen and suffocated to death after being pushed around by the tides, according to the non-profit Friends of the Hunley. Another ship may have clipped the sub, or it may have been destroyed by its own torpedo. It's also possible that the captain was somehow disabled by an enemy shooter, causing the vessel to fill with water and drown the crew. But we'll probably never be 100% sure about what doomed the Hunley. Number 8. Glowing wounds. During the spring of 1862, Union soldiers under the command of Ulysses S. Grant camped out near the Tennessee River outside Shiloh while they waited for backup troops to arrive. On the morning of April 6th, a band of Confederate troops launched a surprise attack on the regiment. The battle continued into the night as the backup soldiers arrived. Soon enough, they outnumbered the Confederate unit by over 10,000 men. Medics on both sides of the skirmish were unprepared for the sheer carnage they encountered. It took more than 2 days to remove all the wounded soldiers from the battlefield. As they laid on the ground into the night waiting for help, they saw that some of their injuries had a faint greenish-blue glow. The medics who treated them noticed that the men who reported glowing wounds had a much higher survival rate than those who did not. They also experienced fewer infections, healed faster, and had less scarring. The cause of this so-called angel's glow remained a mystery until 2001, when a teenager named Bill Martin visited the battlefield and learned about the strange symptom. He suspected that luminescent bacteria was responsible and teamed up with his friend John Curtis to investigate further. Their research led them to a glowing bacteria called Photohorabdus luminescens, which lives inside parasitic worms called nematodes. The nematodes live inside insect larvae where they vomit up the bacteria. Bill and John theorized that these nematodes were attracted to insects living in soldiers' wounds, and that the bacteria they threw up caused the glow. The chemicals that were produced in the process killed the insects, which explains the lower infection rates among those with glowing wounds. P. luminescens normally can't survive at human body temperatures, but it was cold enough outside for the injured men to get hypothermia, enabling the bacteria to live in their injuries. John and Bill won first prize that year at the 2001 Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. Number 7. The Gray Ghost of the Confederacy. John Singleton Mosby commanded the 43rd Battalion of the Confederate Army, known as Mosby's Rangers. Based in North Central Virginia, the unit was notorious for its ability to conduct lightning-quick raids and elude Union forces by disappearing and blending in with locals. Most of the men who served under Mosby had no previous military experience, yet they gained a reputation as some of the quickest and cleverest soldiers to fight in the war. In 1863, Mosby and his 29 men captured a Union general, 2 captains, 30 enlisted men, and 58 horses without firing a single shot. He was so good at what he did, he became known as the Gray Ghost of the Confederacy. The commander was also extremely resilient. He returned to the battlefield just a month after being shot in the thigh and spent just 3 weeks recovering after taking a bullet to the groin while taunting a Union regiment on his horse. Mosby suffered his worst wound when a Union commander shot him through the window of a home while he ate with a family. The wound was declared mortal, yet he recovered and returned to the war effort just 2 months later. The Union became so desperate to get its hands on the Gray Ghost, it offered a $5,000 bounty on his head, roughly the equivalent of $90,000 in today's currency. Even then, he managed to avoid capture. His enemies couldn't figure out the secret behind the man's stealth, and even when they were hot on his trail, he seemed to magically slip out of sight. Mosby became one of the last Confederate soldiers to surrender after learning that a warrant for his arrest had been rescinded. He became a lawyer and formed a friendship with his former enemy, Ulysses S. Grant. The cunning ex-commander went on to serve as the American consul to Hong Kong and also worked for the Department of Justice. He died in 1916 at the age of 82. Number 6. Camp Itch. Throughout history, soldiers have dealt with a number of uncomfortable and sometimes deadly conditions and infections. After all, it's difficult to keep up on hygiene while living in the wilderness, and the conditions can also take a toll on the immune system. During the Civil War, a painful skin condition known as camp itch plagued troops on both sides of the battlefield. It appeared early on in the war and worsened as the conflict dragged on, causing severe swelling and blistering of the skin along with uncontrollable itching. And while the mysterious condition sometimes spread from returning soldiers to civilians after the war ended, it had all but disappeared by 1867. Many medical experts at the time were left baffled and unsure of how to treat the symptoms. Some suspected that epidemic scabies was the culprit and managed to successfully treat it with certain medications. But on a large scale, the ailment was extremely difficult, if not impossible, to control. It was also difficult to treat because it was just one of several skin conditions that were known to spread among troops. Researchers got to the bottom of the mystery in 2006 when they reviewed the chronology and documentation of the illness and reasonably concluded that camp itch was in fact epidemic scabies. It might have been easier to control if soldiers were quicker to report the condition and if they were relieved from duty while receiving treatment, but neither scenario was likely, and the torturous ailment pervaded the militaries for the entire war. Number 5. Mystery photos. The Civil War was the first major conflict to be extensively photographed thanks to the technology's increasing popularity at the time. A lot of soldiers carried photos of their loved ones onto the battlefield, only for the pictures to be found on the ground later on. And it was often difficult to identify the picture's owner or the people in the image. One of the so-called mystery photos was found between two dead soldiers, one Union and one Confederate, after the Battle of Port Royal in Virginia. It featured a little girl who remains a mystery to this day. Private Thomas W. Timberlake, the Confederate soldier who discovered the picture, took it with him. It eventually ended up at the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond, along with several other mystery photographs that were never reclaimed. While it's unlikely that anyone knows who the people in the images are, the museum welcomes any tips that might help identify them. In 2012, it appealed to the public for information about the mystery girl, but the mystery remains unsolved. Who do you think the girl was? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 4. The Gettysburg Curse. The Civil War battlefield at Gettysburg is one of the most historic places in the U.S. It's also allegedly one of the country's most cursed and haunted places. There are countless ghost sightings, and it seems like anyone who disturbs the site ends up suffering from serious misfortune, especially if they take rocks from an area called the Devil's Den. One man who visited Gettysburg with his wife in 2006 took 3 small stones as souvenirs. Not long after that, he broke his arm, lost his job and his house, and went to prison for 9 years. His wife left him, but also endured her own string of bad luck in the form of serious health problems. When the man was released from prison, he mailed the rocks back to Gettysburg along with an apology for stealing them. Stolen property is returned to the site every 3 or 4 months and usually arrives with an apologetic letter from the thief, according to Park Ranger Maria Brady, who spoke with the Washington Post in 2016. Regardless of whether or not the rocks are cursed, taking them is against park rules, which is good enough reason to leave them undisturbed. Number 3. Lost Confederate Gold. After the Civil War ended in April 1865, the country needed money to rebuild. The Union set out to seize Confederate assets with its sights set on the losing party's war treasury. Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his government had fled Richmond with a large amount of gold, silver, coins, and jewelry after learning that federal troops were after them. They loaded the goods onto a train and took a separate train southward. Union officials estimated that the fugitives made off with several $1 million worth of valuables. Confederate Navy Captain William H. Parker, who was tasked with protecting the treasure, later claimed that he had no more than $500,000 in his possession when he left Richmond. By then, the Confederacy was more or less going broke, and it makes sense to think that maybe there wasn't so much money left by the time Davis deposited some of it into a bank vault in Georgia for safekeeping. The true value of the hoard will probably never be known. When the Union finally caught up with Davis's party in Irwinville, Georgia, they only had a few dollars on them. The missing treasure was never found. To this day, it continues to inspire myths and legends about what might have happened to it or where it might be. Many believe that the treasure was hidden and that it's still out there, waiting to be discovered. Others think that it was stolen, or that it was divided up among plantation owners. But nobody's been able to prove how a very large amount of money disappeared over the course of roughly 6 weeks and never resurfaced. And if anyone has known of its whereabouts at any point since then, they've done a fantastic job at keeping their mouths shut about it. Number 2. The Ghosts of Kolb's Farm. Civil War folklore is rife with stories of battlefield ghosts, even when it comes to war's smaller and lesser-known skirmishes. Take, for example, the Battle of Kolb's Farm. On June 22, 1864, 14,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of Lieutenant General John B. Hood attacked a 15,000-strong unit of Union fighters near Marietta, Georgia. But Hood's overconfidence backfired on him when poor terrain conditions forced his men to retreat, securing a Union victory. The battle lasted less than a day, but the Confederate death toll was still high at 1,500 lives lost. Houses were eventually built on the property and new residents moved in. It didn't take long for some families to start noticing strange supernatural phenomena. One household has claimed to see a man walking around in their home clad in Civil War-era clothing. They've also experienced mysterious cold sensations and felt invisible hands tugging at their clothing. And when nobody's looking, someone or something has been known to play with the family's power tools. They eventually came to accept the ghost, who seems to be a shy spirit and only causes mischief when he wants attention. The family has learned to peacefully coexist with their uninvited housemate, which is probably a good idea. After all, aside from moving, there's probably not much else they can do. Number 1. Stonewall Jackson's death. Lieutenant General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson was second in command to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. While returning to camp with a group of his men one night after the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, a fellow unit of Confederate fighters mistook them for a Union cavalry force and opened fire. Jackson took 2 bullets to his left arm and 1 in his right hand. His arm was amputated. At first, it seemed as though the general was on the road to recovery, but he contracted pneumonia and died 8 days after being shot. The most commonly accepted version of events holds that Union Major John Berry instructed his troops to shoot at Jackson's group without giving them a chance to identify themselves. But until recently, historians were unable to agree on exactly what caused the confusion that led to the friendly fire. Over time, the story became muddled with claims from people who said they played a role in Jackson's death as a way to piggyback off his fame. Conspiracy theories and suspicions of foul play further obscured the narrative. In 2013, astronomer Don Olson and researcher Lori E. Jasinki calculated the moon's exact position and phase on that fateful night. They also determined exactly where the 2 parties were positioned when the shooting took place and what time it probably happened. Based on those details, it's extremely likely that Jackson would have appeared to Berry and his men as a dark, unrecognizable silhouette. The study marked a major step in solving the mystery and has helped to restore Berry's credibility among those who have doubted that his actions were an honest mistake.
Number 10. Nike Missile Bases. During the Cold War, the United States government established nearly 300 missile sites as part of Project Nike, which saw the development of the country's first operational anti-aircraft missile system. Between 1954 and the 1970s, the supersonic surface-to-air missiles sat at these sites, ready to launch in the event of a Soviet bomber attack. But as the Soviets shifted their focus to developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, the threat of an air attack lessened. The US government needed money to fund its own ICBM project, as well as the country's deepening involvement in the Vietnam War. Starting in the mid-1960s, the number of active Nike missile bases throughout America steadily decreased. By 1974, all the sites were closed. The remnants of some 265 properties are still visible today, but only a few remain intact. Eventually, they'll be reclaimed by nature, redeveloped, or repurposed by the military. In recent years, Geographic Information Systems specialist David Tewksbury worked to compile a visual record of the sites before they vanish. The project involved combing through hundreds of Google Earth images with plans to use them in a database that could be accessed through the program. The collection includes aerial photos of deserted and overgrown bases in Cleveland, Seattle, Chicago, Indiana, the Hawaiian island of Oahu, and elsewhere. Number 9. A deserted city. East St. Louis, Illinois was once a prosperous boomtown with a peak population of around 82,000 residents during the 1920s. It was one of the most successful cities in the state until the 1960s, when the manufacturers that once brought thousands of jobs to the area moved their operations elsewhere, taking 70% of the city's businesses with them. Between 1970 and 2000, East St. Louis lost over half its population as residents left for better economic opportunities in other places. Today, less than 30,000 people live there. When most people think of the devastation that plagued the Rust Belt during the deindustrialization era, cities like Detroit and Buffalo are among the first that often come to mind. In fact, it's unlikely that many people from outside the region surrounding East St. Louis had ever even heard of it until recent years, when the city made news headlines for its widespread crime, poverty, and empty, decaying buildings. Viral Google Earth and Street View photos reveal the shocking devastation that plagues the area. Eerily empty streets are lined with deserted businesses and countless homes are boarded up. Buildings crumble from years of neglect, spilling bricks and building materials onto the ground below. The most visible landmark is the 12-story Spivey building, which was built during the 1920s in an attempt to give East St. Louis a skyline. But instead of making the city more attractive, it's become a graffiti-covered eyesore. Many locals are dedicated to reviving the area. They've built community gardens and a new church and library. And there's even talk about establishing a branch of Eastern Illinois University, along with gambling establishments that will bring jobs to the population. Hopefully 20 years from now, the Google view of East St. Louis will show a thriving city enjoying a successful renaissance. Number 8. SS Jassam. On December 1, 2003, a Bolivian cargo ship called the SS Jassam ran aground on the Wingate Reef off the coast of Sudan. To this day, nobody knows why it capsized. The 265-foot-long vessel is one of the largest shipwrecks that can be seen on Google Earth. For a while, the Jassam could be seen laying on its side. A travel company called Emperor Divers asked the Sudanese government to relocate the wreck to deeper waters. But at the time, there was an ongoing investigation to determine who was at fault for the crash. Since then, the vessel appears to have sunk almost entirely. The Norwegian-built ship was launched in 1961. It was owned by Al Ramzadi Sea Transport of Qatar when it joined the many other wrecks in the area, which is popular among divers. Interestingly, very little information is available about the Jassam. It doesn't even appear to have its own Wikipedia page, leaving its history and the circumstances surrounding the wreck shrouded in mystery. Number 7. Mysterious Ice Ship. In 2020, a Google Earth user spotted what he thought was a 400-foot-long ice ship off the Antarctic coast. He shared his findings on YouTube, along with the suspicions that something is hidden beneath the snow and ice. The video caught the attention of conspiracy theorists who were quick to chime in with their theories about the alleged ship. Some thought it looked like a cruise liner with windows laying on its side and wondered what the vessel was doing in such a remote part of the globe. Others believed that the YouTuber had found Noah's Ark. There's also a good chance that the image features a large chunk of ice and snow that simply happens to resemble an overturned ship. In fact, humans have a proven tendency to see familiar objects and patterns in random or unrelated objects and patterns. It's called pareidolia, and it's the same mechanism that's at play when we stare up the clouds and look for recognizable shapes. What do you think? Is it possible that the object is an ice-covered shipwreck, or are the YouTuber and his followers seeing something that isn't there? Let us know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. Number 6. Roman Ruins. While studying aerial images of his hometown in Sorbolo, Italy in 2005, a computer programmer named Luca Mori spotted the path of an ancient dried-up river. Nearby, he noticed some unusual rectangular shadows. Upon taking a closer look, Mori determined that the shapes represented a buried man-made structure. He continued to examine the site until he made out what happened to be the inner courtyards of an ancient villa. The observant Google Earth enthusiast contacted archaeologists who initially suspected that the structure dated back to the Bronze Age. They later confirmed, based on ceramic fragments found at the site, that it was a pre-Christian Roman villa. Mori probably didn't realize it at the time, but his discovery marked one of the first examples of Google Earth being used as an archaeological tool. It was also among the first of numerous archaeological discoveries that have been made by ordinary people since the software became widely available. Number 5. Mysterious Stone Structures. Little is known about the history of Saudi Arabia's vast deserts, especially when it comes to the pre-Islamic era. The harsh climate and political instability have made it difficult at times for archaeologists to carry out excavations. Technology is making it a lot easier for researchers to identify potential ruins in places that aren't always easily accessible. In 2020, experts detected over 100 strange stone structures in the Nafud Desert using Google Earth. Known as mustatils, they represent a newly discovered type of structure, and they're incredibly ancient, with some dating as far back as 7,000 years. Between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, Saudi Arabia underwent a green period. Unusually high rainfall led to the unusual presence of greenery, making the region more livable than we know it as today. The people who passed through the region during this time and shortly after built the elongated rectangular structures with thousands of tons of stones and rock. Measuring roughly 480 by 420 feet on average, the mustatils represent some of the world's grandest prehistoric monumental architecture. They were found near water sources, and researchers initially suspected that they were built in response to climate change. But their purpose is a mystery, and the team failed to identify any obvious practical use for them, leading them to conclude that the monuments had some sort of ritual or symbolic meaning. Number 4. Ancient Geoglyphs. Sometimes it takes looking at something from a different angle to discover something fascinating hidden in plain sight. There are more than 50 massive geoglyphs dotting the landscape in northern Kazakhstan, but they're difficult to notice at ground level. The collection of shapes, including squares, rings, and crosses, are much more visible from a bird's eye view. Researchers discovered the sprawling geoglyphs in 2014 using Google Earth. Curiously, some of them resemble swastikas, which were commonly used during ancient times before the design became a hateful symbol. Measuring between 295 and 1,312 feet long, the geoglyphs are made from earthen mounds. A team discovered the remains of structures and hearths at the sites, indicating that rituals took place there. The geoglyphs may have also been used to mark land ownership, according to archaeologists Irina Shavina and Andrew Logvin, who spoke with Live Science. But experts are admittedly unsure of who built them, why they used geometric designs, and what purpose the geoglyphs served. Number 3. A derelict mansion. In Hertfordshire, England, there is a derelict mansion that was once owned by an eccentric Greek millionaire named Athanasios Thanos Takmintsis. He bought the property in 1999 and lived there as a recluse with at least 3 of his 5 children. The family suddenly abandoned the home in 2016 without explanation. It's nearly impossible to see the mansion from the road because it's hidden by trees, but overhead images of it have surfaced on Google Earth in recent years, giving users a rare peek at the deserted property. Even from the outside, it's clear that the house and the smaller building next to it are in a state of neglect. There are several aging cars parked outside, including a Bentley. One urban explorer was brave enough to investigate the site firsthand. The condition the home was left in tells the story of a family that picked up and moved in a hurry. There were unfinished board games on the table and clean plates in the dishwasher that never got put away. Furniture still fills the rooms, and there's a telescope positioned toward a large window. The upstairs closets are filled with designer clothing and other personal belongings that most people take with them when they move. Thanos reportedly profited well enough from his investments not to leave home much, and he preferred it that way. But his life was shrouded in mystery. Nobody seemed to know what the man did for a living, and he stashed large wads of cash throughout the home. He was also allegedly obsessed with security and had guards and Dobermans at the property when he lived there. Speaking with The Sun, brother-in-law Gordon Michael John described Thanos as a miser who acted flashy in front of people but was cheap behind closed doors. Last he knew, the man was living in London. Whatever he's up to, he clearly wants to be left alone and doesn't care to indulge the public on why he fled his mansion on what seems like a moment's notice. Number 2. Lost Amazonian settlements. In 2018, a postdoctoral student at the University of Exeter named Jonas de Souza discovered a collection of lost Amazonian settlements in Brazil. He made the fascinating finds using Google Earth and satellite technology that enables researchers to see traces of structures that are buried in the ground or shrouded by thick vegetation. Although de Souza's team found 81 pre-Columbian sites containing 104 earthen defensive structures, evidence of deforestation in these areas further points toward previous human activity. Dating back to sometime around 1500 AD, these villages may have once housed millions of people. Around 1 million residents lived in settlements along the Tapajos River. Researchers believe Europeans wiped the population out through violence and disease. Speaking with New Scientist, de Souza pointed out that most of the Amazon remains unexplored by archaeologists. As they continue to survey the land, they're realizing that parts of the Amazon basin were much more settled than they previously thought. In fact, experts assumed many areas were never lived in by humans until they discovered evidence to the contrary through these types of studies. The findings demonstrate the need to revisit some of the early European colonizers who described seeing massive settlements in the region. In his chronicling of the explorations of Francisco de Orellana, Gaspar de Carvajal wrote of a town that stretched for 15 miles without any space from house to house. These accounts were often written off as fantasies or exaggerated observations, but there's a growing body of evidence suggesting that maybe the seemingly wild claims of early explorers were truthful after all. Number 1. Ancient Fish Trap. In 2009, researchers noticed a large underwater V-shaped stone structure in the Teivi estuary near Britain's Poppet Sands beach. Measuring more than 750 feet long, it protrudes roughly a foot above the sand. Archaeologists identified the structure as an ancient fish trap known as fish weir. It was never noticed until it was examined from an aerial view because it looks like a natural reef when you're in the water, according to diver and environmental lecturer Dr. Ziggy Otto, who spoke with Mail Online. When it was in use, the weir would have trapped fish behind its walls when the tide receded. It's completely underwater today and is likely around 1,000 years old. Fish weirs were common in Britain at the time, and they were so effective that they were banned in rivers because they threatened the fish supply. But the ban didn't include coastal waters, so people built the traps there. The fish weir at Poppet Sands is believed to be one of the biggest structures of its kind.
Number 10. The USS Connecticut. The USS Connecticut is one of the U.S. Navy's most advanced nuclear submarines. At any given time, a crew of 100 people and less than a dozen officers are aboard the 353-foot-long Seawolf-class sub, which has been sailing the world's oceans since the late 90s. While the ship itself is pretty spectacular, it's led a rather interesting life since its commission. In 2003, the Connecticut surfaced through the Arctic ice near the North Pole. A polar bear came by and gnawed on the rubber before continuing on its way. The following year, the sub took to the sea to serve in the War on Terror. It returned to the Naval Submarine Base in New London, Connecticut several months later and spent the next 3 years undergoing rigorous maintenance. In 2007, the vessel was transferred to Naval Base Kitsap Bremerton in Washington's Puget Sound. It underwent an extensive overhaul from 2012 to 2017 after being used in an Arctic training exercise. The submarine made headlines in 2020 when it became infested with bedbugs. An anonymous source told papers that the pests became an obvious problem by spring of 2020, but nothing was done even as crew members began to complain that the bugs were practically eating them alive. Meanwhile, the Navy claimed that there were no serious health problems caused by the bugs, just a few bites here and there. Finally, months after they first appeared, the bedbugs were exterminated. But the Connecticut's luck took another bad turn last October when it crashed into an underwater mountain in the South China Sea. The boat's commander, executive officer, and chief were relieved from command after an investigation found that they fell short of safety standards. At last update, the sub was undergoing repairs in Washington. Number 9. Chemical agent-resistant coatings. As part of an ongoing project that explores ways to easily clean military equipment, the U.S. Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, is developing paint-like coatings that temporarily shield equipment from chemical warfare agents, CWAs. This better enables the military to recover assets and resume normal operations after a chemical agent attack. Historically speaking, military equipment technology is focused on coatings that protect against rusting and provide a camouflage effect. But until now, little attention has been paid to resisting chemical agents with these coatings. The goal is to develop temporary overcoats that troops can spray, brush, or wipe onto their equipment and that last for at least 6 months before the solution needs to be reapplied. In addition to protecting against dangerous chemicals, the ideal product would make the decontamination process easier. DTRA is working on the project in collaboration with numerous other government organizations and industry partners, including the Naval Research Laboratory, the Army Research Laboratory, and the Combat Capabilities Development Command Chemical Biological Center. They've experimented with several materials so far, including strippable overcoats and ways to incorporate repellency into existing coatings. The newly developed products last for more than 8 weeks in typical environmental conditions and reduce the absorption of chemicals by anywhere from 5-fold to 100-fold, according to officials. As chemical warfare risks have increased, this innovative solution could make a huge impact. What other uses do you think chemical-resistant coatings could serve? Share your thoughts in the comments. Number 8. The Beast of Kandahar. The RQ-170 Sentinel, better known as the Beast of Kandahar, is a top-secret stealth drone that the U.S. Air Force has been using since 2005. It was developed by Skunk Works, which is the same Lockheed Martin division responsible for the F-22 Raptor, F-117 Nighthawk, F-35 Lightning II, and other iconic military aircraft. Little is known about the RQ-170, which is believed to be a high-altitude and stealthy reconnaissance platform used for highly classified missions. The U.S. military has used the device to spy on Iran and to scope out Osama bin Laden's residence before the 2011 raid that ended in the al-Qaeda leader's death. It gained its nickname as the Beast of Kandahar after appearing on a runway in the southern Afghanistan province in 2007. The Air Force formally acknowledged the drone's existence in 2009, but has kept quiet about the technology it's equipped with. Some speculate that the Beast of Kandahar may not have the most advanced technology that exists, but that it's favored for its cost-effectiveness. It's been reported that the drone's per-unit cost may be as little as $6 million, which would make it attractive to the military as a low-cost machine with high capabilities. In 2011, Iranian state television aired footage of an RQ-170 that it claimed had been captured by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard while performing surveillance of the country's nuclear efforts. U.S. defense officials denied these claims and said that it was extremely unlikely that Iranian intelligence hacked the drone and brought it down for a landing. But they offered no explanation for how and why a seemingly intact RQ-170 ended up in Iranian hands. Number 7. Phaser. The Personnel Halting and Stimulation Response Rifle, or Phaser, is a non-lethal laser rifle designed to stun an enemy without causing serious or permanent harm. A prototype was developed at the Air Force Research Laboratory in New Mexico with the purpose of temporarily blinding and disorienting the target. Blinding weapons were banned under a 1994 United Nations protocol, but the policy's wording does not prohibit temporarily blinding weapons. Before the development of the Phaser, the main problem with weapons of its type was their tendency to cause permanent blindness, according to Tobias Feakin of Bradford University's Non-Lethal Weapons Project in the UK. The Phaser rifle was a game-changer because it's less harmful, although it can still cause eye problems when it's used at close range or for an extended period. To counter this problem, the U.S. Department of Defense has proposed something called an eye-safe rangefinder, which would adjust the laser's power based on its distance from the target. Rumor has it that the Phaser rifle is named after the phaser weapon in Star Trek, which similarly had lethal and non-lethal settings. What do you think of this piece of equipment? Is it an ethical solution? Let us know in the comments down below. Number 6. Adaptive Camouflage. Developed by Swedish defense security company BAE Systems, adaptive camouflage masks a military vehicle's infrared signature from far-infrared night vision devices, enabling it to go undetected by an enemy's thermal imaging systems. The material consists of around 1,000 hexagonal panels covering the sides of the vehicle, which are heated and cooled to match the temperature of the surrounding environment. In addition to helping the vehicle evade enemy detection, adaptive camouflage is capable of mimicry and can be set to imitate a chosen object such as a car. This reduces the vehicle's range of detectability to just 1,640 feet, meaning the enemy would have to get pretty close to pick up on its presence. The system also allows the operator to snap thermal images of the vehicle's surroundings, and it has an armored effect. It was originally designed for tracked combat vehicles, and a lighter version for helicopters is in the works. Number 5. X-51A Wave Rider. During the 1990s, the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory started the high-tech program for hypersonic propulsion with the goal of developing a missile capable of traveling at 6 times the speed of sound, or around 4,000 miles per hour. In 2004, designers began to work on the Boeing X-51A Wave Rider, which implemented a hydrocarbon-fueled scramjet engine from a canceled NASA project. The first 2 test flights were unsuccessful. In 2013, the Wave Rider flew for over 6 minutes, traveling at speeds of over Mach 5 for 210 seconds. It was the longest duration hypersonic-powered flight to date. In past flight demonstrations, a B-52 carried the Wave Rider to an altitude of around 50,000 feet before releasing it over the Pacific Ocean, where it blasted to record speeds with the help of a rocket booster. The vehicle is nicknamed the Wave Rider because it was designed to ride its own shockwave, which is why its wings are so small. Its engine is capable of burning atmospheric oxygen, eliminating the need for large fuel tanks seen on conventional rockets. The X-51A was once considered a stepping stone to DARPA's Black Swift project, which was cancelled in 2008. But it was successful enough to remain under development to pave the way for future hypersonic weapons and intelligence. 4 Wave Riders were made for the U.S. Air Force as research vehicles for further development. What purposes do you think these Wave Riders can serve in a conflict? Share your theories in the comments and make sure to subscribe to the channel as well. Number 4. Defense trucks. Military trucks are designed to transport personnel, supplies, and equipment in dangerous and challenging environments. These vehicles seem rather straightforward and basic, but they need to be reliable in order to effectively support military operations and are equipped with advanced technology and capabilities. They come in many different sizes and are tailored to their intended use. Last year, the Army released a list of requirements for its Common Tactical Truck (CTT). There will be fine variants including on- and off-road models. Unlike the current fleet, which lacks commonalities that would facilitate the implementation of new technologies, the new CTT variants will have as many similarities as possible while still being able to perform their respective tasks. This will make it easier to upgrade the technology as things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous operations, driver safety systems, and predictive maintenance and diagnostics improve. The Army is taking bids from different manufacturers who will compete for a contract to produce between 7,000 and 10,000 CTTs to replace the outdated model, which has been in use for over 40 years. Other militaries are updating their truck fleets with the help of German manufacturer Rheinmetall, which recently delivered a shipment of its HX-44M heavy recovery vehicles, HRVs, to the New Zealand Defence Force. The updated model has a nearly 5-foot fording depth and a sophisticated self-recovery system. It can climb slopes with a grade of up to 60% and has a maximum speed of 60 miles per hour, which is pretty fast for a truck of its size. The HX-44M is the first HRV to use an integrated armored swap cabin, which enables its operators to easily reconfigure it for different operational needs. Rheinmetall is already working on its third-generation variant of the vehicle, which will include an advanced driving assistance system that will reduce driver fatigue and intervene during moments of inattentiveness. Number 3. Active Denial System. In 2015, Boeing received a patent to develop technology to protect military vehicles from shockwaves following explosions from missiles and improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. Known as the Active Denial System (ADS) and nicknamed the Heat Ray, it builds on earlier technology that uses a combination of electricity, lasers, and microwaves to fire a beam at its target. Simply put, it works similarly to a microwave but uses shorter and higher frequency waves. The beam only penetrates the top layer of skin but will continuously burn the target as long as it's applied. It took just 3 seconds for most human test subjects to reach their pain threshold, and none of the subjects could tolerate the exposure for more than 5 seconds. The rate at which the target's surface temperature increases depends on what the target is and how far it is from the transmitter, as well as the beam's frequency and power level, which are set by the operator. An Air Force Research Laboratory spokesperson and test subject described feeling like he was on fire and then feeling fine again as soon as he was away from the beam. There have been a few incidents that left test subjects with second-degree burns, including one individual who spent 2 days in the hospital, but it's rare to experience an effect this severe. The weapon was deployed by the U.S. military in 2010 for use in the Afghanistan war, but it never saw combat and was withdrawn. During the same year, the Los Angeles Sheriff Department announced plans to use the technology to control inmates and break up fights at a local detention center. As a non-lethal weapon with high effectiveness and a low probability of injury, the Active Denial System is a good alternative to more dangerous applications of force. Number 2. Black Knight ARCV. The Black Knight is a prototype unmanned ground combat vehicle that looks similar to a tank. It weighs 12 tons and can be airlifted and deployed from a Lockheed C-130 Hercules cargo plane. The vehicle was designed for use on all types of terrain and day or night missions that are deemed too dangerous for manned vehicles. It can operate autonomously or be driven from inside another vehicle via its robotic operator control station. An advanced perception system enables the Black Knight to detect and avoid obstacles, and its autonomous navigation system is capable of planning routes according to either directness or the lowest terrain risk. When the vehicle detects a lethal object in its path, it stops. Developed by BAE Systems, the Black Knight began as a project called the Armed Robotic Demonstrator. It made its first public appearance in 2006 at the Association of the United States Army in Washington, D.C. The vehicle received a lot of attention, leading to the addition of its remote operation capability. Its ability to keep soldiers out of harm's way while transmitting information could lead to improved safety and better planning on the battlefield. The Black Knight is currently being evaluated by the U.S. Army. Number 1. Thunder Generator. Known as a sonic blaster, the Thunder Generator produces deafening explosions by firing high-speed shock waves through people. It was first used by Israeli farmers as a harmless yet effective way to scare away crop-eating birds and other pests. Last year, Israel's Ministry of Defense approved a license for the technology company Army-Tech to develop a military version of the weapon for use in crowd control and border security. The Thunder Generator combines liquid petroleum gas with air and then detonates the mixture, causing a series of ear-splitting blasts. As the fuel exits the cannon barrel, it produces dozens of rapid-fire, high-velocity shock bursts, which can be calibrated for different uses. The weapon is capable of firing between 61 and 100 bursts per minute, producing extreme air pressure that acts as a deterrent in addition to the sonic boom it creates. Army Tech claims that these off-putting effects don't do any long-term damage to people as long as no one comes within 33 feet of it, which can cause serious injury or death. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.